Hey everyone, and welcome to the April edition of Tamil Innovators by TamilCulture.com. I'm your host, Arani Raskumar. This episode is very near and dear to my heart because our guest is one of my mentors and one of my closest friends, Kumi Somaskandan. Hi, Kumi.
Hi, thank you. That's quite the warm welcome.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Getting over a migraine, but feeling much better now.
Oh, you've had this migraine for 5 days. Thanks for doing the interview with us.
It happens.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Kumi is and this is going to be a long title, guys. It took me all day to memorize this, but she is the head of global sponsor processing of retirement operations at Manulife Investment Management. Correct? There you go. So I know a lot about you, Kumi, just because we're friends and we talk every day, but I was wondering if you can ask if you could introduce yourself personally and career-wise to our viewers.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. I am happy to say that my career has been a very exciting one with lots of changes, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. But having said that, it is always interesting to look back and wonder how you got here. And that's kind of the part that I think intrigues me the most, because it was purely accidental how I got into this industry. So I grew up in Sri Lanka. I moved here when I was 12. And one of the more interesting things about my upbringing was I actually did grow up in a very melting pot of an environment, even in Sri Lanka. Our whole neighborhood was mixed. So in many ways, I think the transition to Canada was very easy because I wasn't surrounded by homogenous. I was not in a homogenous environment where we lived. So that was one thing that I think set me up for the transition to Canada, set me up to be super adaptive and easygoing in many ways, because nothing was really very predetermined. Like we just, it was culturally, everyone was from a different part of the country, spoke a different language, had a different religion, and we coexisted and practiced each other's, ways of living. Like I had neighbors who made pot roast every weekend. I've never eaten pot roast because I don't eat beef, but I would be at their house for dinner with them and eat something else. So, that I think was a lot of why I feel I was successful here. The transition was very simple in many ways. I grew up in Toronto. I went to University of Toronto and did my Bachelor of Commerce, did my CMA, and just around the time I had to go off up north to do some audits, I was like, oh, this is awful. Who wants to be in Thunder Bay? And randomly sent my then fiance's resume for a job in Bermuda. Just out of, I don't want to go up north. Be nice to live somewhere warm. And the next thing we know, he has a job interview, he gets offered a job. And now I haven't even thought about it. So had to kind of quickly start thinking about, do I want to do this? Do I want to go there? So mainly Bermuda as a financial services industry at the time, focused in reinsurance and fund admin. Those are their two big things. And I got a job in fund admin at a little company called Hemisphere. And I spent 4.5 years in Bermuda, had my daughter there, and we moved back to Toronto. But it was the beginning of a very, very good career for me. And it's really set me up for what I came back to. I can keep going, but I spent the next 15 years in Toronto at Citco Fund Services, which was one of the largest independent fund administrators, and built that office out along with four of my colleagues. And at the end of that 16 years, I got called by RBC for a role to run their operations for their fund admin custody business. And it was a big change. I took a leap of faith. I made the change. I learned a lot. I finally entered the Canadian business space, which I had never really experienced. But it was a rocky relationship in the sense that, my speed of working and how a big bank functions is very different. So it took a lot to get us in sync and to work through. I did some interesting things there, including some big tech projects, and consolidated a lot of the business. And then I moved on to Manulife about 18 months ago. It is also a big matrixed organization, but it's a little closer to what I'm used to because I have US retirement and Canadian retirement. So it's actually a nice mix with a lot of different locations that we service our clients out of. And that is where I am today.
Amazing. You have such a career path. I think it's super intriguing, and we're going to get into where you want to go now after this as well. But I think let's start with the basics. And I was like laughing a little when you mentioned Citco, because if anyone checks our LinkedIn, I worked at Citco as well. And as I love to joke and say, you were my boss's 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 boss, but you weren't in the same department, but I like to say it anyways.
It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot.
It was a lot of fun, I have to say.
It was a great place to be. What I wanted to say is that you mentioned RBC, it was a little bit of a change because you moved from Citco to RBC, and it was like very corporate bank style. And Citco is huge as well, we know that. But the way we functioned there was very much sort of startup-like, I think, with very dynamic teams, everyone on the open floor, everyone speaking to each other, no real hierarchy, no real, corner offices. I mean, there were for like the MDs and such, but the MDs would walk around and talk to everyone anyways.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it was difficult. Can you speak to that a little bit more, like what the exact changes were that you may have been taken aback by?
I think I didn't really comprehend culture. I just assumed you can build culture around you, or that you are part of a culture, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't really anticipate how different culture can be, right? Because I worked at Hemisphere, which became Bisis, which then got bought out by Citi. Citco was one of the largest independent administrators, but they grew organically. And in both organizations, as a very new person to both organizations, I worked with the CEO on a regular basis. Like I've done pitches at Citco with just the CEO and myself. Like I've flown to another city where I was probably maybe 2 years in the company, and I met him and we walked in and we pitched to a client. It is just different. Like you learn so much, and you're learning in the moment. You're not really getting an opportunity to practice before you run for it, right? My first pitch at Citco was for one of the largest fund of funds that existed at the time. I had been at Citco for 3.5 months, and they were going to pitch for this big piece of business. They had done some of the work for this particular client, but the client was ready to move all their work, outsource all of their work. So I flew to New York with a group of people I have never met. And so they came from Amsterdam, because that's where Citco had some of all their fund of fund expertise. We met in New York, in a hotel lobby, chatted for probably 30 minutes, walked into the Lipstick building where this client is in New York City, and spent 2 hours or 3 hours pitching. And I'll never forget this. The only question that one of the investment managers asked me was, "Are you a pit bull?"
Oh,
are you a pit bull? Do you understand that we need a pit bull? And I'll never forget this statement, because, what do you say? No, I'm not. Yes, I am. I don't know what the answer is. And I just said, I said, as long as it doesn't require biting, I think we're okay. And it was literally, you won businesses based on how much they trusted you. It's just, as companies get bigger and bigger, and as consultants come into play, you play at a different level. It requires having multiple iterations. So that's what I was saying. Like, I think I just got used to learning in the room, looking for cues on how the leaders wanted, what direction they wanted to go in, checking the the temperature of the people you're talking to and seeing if they're warming up to you or not. So it was very different. And I think when you take that and you go into a very big corporate environment where RBC is a huge bank, but INTS, the division that I ran, was a reverse joint venture that they pulled back in. And it's all acquisition based. So they have a little bit of Royal Trust, a little bit of, Dexia, a little bit of this, a little bit of the back office of CI. And none of that had ever really been brought together either. So each one had their own little subculture. And when you work at Citco, there's one culture. And that's really it. Like, you don't have to love it, but if you're going to thrive in it, you're going to learn it and you're going to be part of that culture. And I think those are the kinds of things where as a leader, I had to learn that I can't set the tone anymore. This is a place that has multiple tones set at multiple levels, and you have to figure out how to fit into it. And there were some hard lessons. Like, I had some good wins because clients loved me. I had, leaders that enjoyed my style, but it was definitely, tough at some junctures for some people, and for me, like, to know how to fail, because that wasn't part of my experience, right? I hadn't really bombed anything before that.
That's interesting,
because it was quite a learning experience.
Yeah, and that was like 15 years after your first chunk of your career, correct?
20 years, because I did 5 years offshore. And same thing there, like the CEO, there was a fund that was launching and they had over 1,000 subscriptions, and we would take faxes and have to transcribe them and complete subdocs.
Oh, good.
The CEO and I worked on it till like 2 a.m. on a weekend, because that was so, like, they were small, they were 100 people, and they blew up into like 500 people in about 3 years, right? So really, you just got to work with everyone side by side. It could be anybody, it could be the assistant, it could be a fund accountant, it could be, anyone, just you found people and you just got it done.
Yeah.
It was very, I would say, I think I still look at those days nostalgically, because I think you just learn so differently when there isn't a procedure document or a checklist, right? You're creating it as you go along. You're it. So those were sort of the ways in which we learned, and I think it still influences how I approach things. But even with the Citcos, you started to bring in risks, risk environments, and having SOC 1s, and having really, really formalized activities to fit into that culture. So we grew up with it, but your DNA sort of is stuck in that startup mode.
Of course. That's very interesting, because my mind is still on the 1,000 subscriptions. Thinking about that, just because, I was in fund admin too, it's a very large task and very detailed task. And to be doing that with the CEO is a really rare opportunity.
It's like filling out every prescription at a pharmacy manually, right? Where there's no system and you're basically taking it in and you're doing it yourself. It's kind of like that, but you cut corners because you're a human being. You can think intellectually and make judgments to be like, I don't need to read this, or I don't need to do that. But it is a little bit like learning how to do math without a calculator.
Yeah, and each subscription document is about 72 pages. So to have 1,000 of those,
those were the heydays of hedge funds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But going back to the point of actually having the experience of doing that closely with the CEO had obviously built a rapport between you and the CEO, has put you out there, you kind of started at the jump with something super big. And I think, knowing you, that's kind of how you steamrolled into being a pit bull. But curious, you've managed huge teams on, the startup side, and then also in these corporate environments. Do you find that your new hires or your junior hires, maybe not just yours, but what you see, who you see, generally now. Do you see that they have the same sort of pitbull tendency or the ability to take on that initiative and say, okay, I'm going to do this on the weekend and we're going to get it done? Or do you see something else now?
See, that's a great question. I think the challenge is not so much whether people can do it or not. It's more that you can't expect it anymore. Right? So there is a massive pendulum shift from 20 years ago to now in terms of what is acceptable to ask of your people, what is the right level at which you pitch the work. So I think you can't ask anymore. So you have to be super, super careful about those kinds of expectations. Having said that, when I joined Manulife about 3 to 6 months after I joined, we had a major issue with one of our platforms, and it required a lot of people to put in extra hours at the start of the day, at the end of the day. And it was kind of like the pandemic over again for them, because when the pandemic hit, we had to figure out how to move people, how to get the work done, how to change from the way we were used to managing. So there was a lot of hours put in at the time. And so this was very similar, and people rolled up their sleeves and just got on with it. So I think those kinds of events are acceptable to demand more, but on a regular basis in a large corporate environment, it wouldn't be acceptable to ask for that. It's really going to be, how each individual does it. And I'm blessed. I have an incredible team since I joined. I've sort of, I've built it since, after I joined, from internally pulling people in to lead. And I think what I learned between my Citco experience and my RBC experience is it's important to have people that like being together. It's not just me. They need to enjoy working with each other. They need to know how to have a laugh when we're on team meetings and to build that relationship. So what I learned to do differently was not to mess around. Like, I go to the different offices, try to bring people together because we're all over the place and half of them are remote permanently, and get them to have a bit of a laugh with each other, because then there's that sort of desire to push yourselves and push each other and support one another to get things done. Half of that, one person will know one thing, somebody else will know something else. And that is the Citco piece that I remember, is to get folks to actually have fun together. And I think when they enjoy each other's company, you get a lot more in terms of productivity. There's a little bit of joy you get from just enjoying each other's company. It's not so much that I've heard this guy recently mention, if it was fun, no one needs to pay someone to work. Right?
True.
So It wasn't really meant to be fun. It was work.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you can insert fun into it in ways. And I think that's kind of, we're in finance and fund admin and processing documents and getting it right and servicing clients so that they have a good retirement. At the end of the day, that's not really exactly, a rollicking time. Right. You got to bring a little bit of joy into it in other ways.
Yeah. That's interesting for sure. I think I want to touch on the pandemic just very quickly, because you did mention that it was tough, and now you have some teams that are permanently remote. Do you find that it was easy? Like, you had to do a switch, like a mind switch, and try and get people to interact. But do you find that they're receptive? Are they able to do this and create the rapport remotely?
So during the pandemic, I think you had nothing else going on. So it was actually okay to work remotely. You had lots of time. People didn't mind working in the morning, taking a break, coming back to their stuff, keep going. There wasn't this sort of pull with the outside life. Everybody was home with their kids and the like. I think with everything kind of reopening and life changing in the real world, a lot of catching up to do. I do think I think we've done a great job of keeping people together, doing lots of Zoom meetings and capturing the attention of our staff. I have an incredible leader, actually. She puts a lot of thought and effort into this into ensuring people are engaged, and how often she kind of does that with them. Like, she's very methodical about engagement, right down to sort of our manager level. So it is very impressive how they've done that piece. What I think the negative is, which is probably discounted, just like when we locked everything up and said everyone to stay home, you don't talk about what are the side effects of that until long after, right? Because we're a massively marketing oriented culture. We want to sell what we want to sell. We don't necessarily want to sit there and going, okay, so we want to do this today, but in 6 months or 12 months, there's going to be impacts from this. And I think that's kind of where we are now, right? There are impacts to that.
Mhm.
There are positive impacts of that, you know, not having to commute. I love working from home 2 days a week. It's fabulous, right? I save 2 hours. I mean, I don't live far from work, but I save probably an hour and a half on, you know, getting ready and going to work and coming back and all of that stuff. I absolutely love it. It's a nice, I wonder sometimes, how did I do it for 20 years where I got up every morning and, you know, got my kids ready and went to work and came back and took care of them afterwards. So there's lots of benefits to it. I think the negatives are that when you're not present, you are distracted. Not always, but it's not as easy to be present. When you are in the office, you get to meet people, actually meet them, not just have sort of a Zoom connection. Those things lead to mentorships, sponsorships, other opportunities, learning from them, how they're doing something. And the thing I said about like what I learned and how I learned in the presence of the CEO, the management team members, and how they did stuff. That exposure, I know you're not going to get it everywhere, but you're going to get it from your boss. You're going to get it from, you know, their peers. That piece, I think, is going to get lost if this is the kind of career you want.
Mhm.
And for young people in particular, because I do hear a lot of young people saying they don't understand why they need to come into the office and stuff. For you, it's actually work. You should want to do it. I would insist. I'm so glad my daughter has to go to school in person every day, because that is what it is to be a human being, is to get interactions, and those interactions is where you learn the most, and not from a textbook. You will learn from the textbook because it helps you get to a certain level, but it is those interactions that are so critical. So I think there are impacts, there are positives and negatives, but you, as a younger person, you should absolutely want to go set foot inside a building. You should want to brush your teeth every morning, put on nice clothes, and get yourself out to an office or somewhere. It's absolutely part of the process for me.
That is a very interesting point. Everyone talks about the positives and how when you're mandated to go and you're just wasting your time, but it's super true. And, you know, maybe we can shift over to mentorship now.
Yeah.
It's not the same. I even started a job in the middle, a new job in the middle of the pandemic. I enjoyed my time there. I learned a lot, but I don't think I had the same sort of mentorship experience with my boss there. He was great, was very helpful, but I've never really met him until maybe the last month that I was there. And it was great. I was sad to leave him. He was sad that I was leaving his team as well. But I had such a great experience at Sitco with my mentors there. And then now that I'm at Anson, I'm in there 5 days a week. All of us are. And half of the things I learn, it's because I'm sitting in the office and I'm eavesdropping. So I'll just turn around.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So I'll just, turn around and be like, what? We're doing that? And then everyone bounces ideas off each other. And it's just not something you're going to get within the 4 walls of your house.
No. If you are thriving, like if you're driving towards an executive role or to be in a leadership position in these organizations, you can get it done in many ways, I'm sure. But in my like humble opinion, that's your fastest way, because you know more. Whether you will know, the non like you're getting the social cues, you're getting the corporate cues, you're learning what makes them excited.
Yes.
That's not something you're hearing on a Zoom call.
Exactly. I agree. And I started, since I was going to work, I started to join things like Tamils in Finance,
Yeah.
which is, which the first time I met you was in person as well. These were networking opportunities that I had because I wanted to further my career by meeting people. This was in person. Then I met you, and you've introduced me to everyone, Shivanu, Tamil culture, so it just was steamrolled through that. And if I was too shy to go out and meet anyone, I don't think, we'd be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when I introduced you as my mentor, you actually are my mentor because you've taught me a lot of things. Of course,
whether you like to hear it or not.
Exactly. Whether I like to hear it
I'm
or
so
not.
sorry to subject you to the pain and suffering. Sometimes my kids aren't willing to listen, so I have to go and bug other people.
It's no bugging for me. I love it. I love hearing your rants in the morning every day.
But speaking of Tamils in Finance, that was one of the things I got to engage myself in during the pandemic. As I was transitioning from RBC to Manulife, I reached out to someone who introduced me to one of the members of Tamils in Finance who literally sent out an email within 5 minutes and introduced me to like 10 guys. And every single one of them reached out and made a connection. So back to a benefit of COVID and working from home was we had time. We could just spend 10 minutes on a call. We didn't have to go meet someone, like, you know what I mean? So that was a huge benefit. And I think that network has really sort of, evolved into something much bigger than just even meeting new people in the Tamil community. Like, we've done some really cool things and we're aspiring to do more cool things. But yes, people and connections. And one of the things we heard from the mentorship teams that we were running was they wanted more in-person things.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
How was mentorship for you when you were in the start of your career? Did you have a lot of mentors? Who really stood out to you?
So it was very informal. Like, before I went to Bermuda, I actually worked for the government. I was at CRA for about 2 years, and I had a great boss who I'm still friends with. And then I went to the provincial auditor's office, which is because I wanted to do my CPA hours. And from there, that's when the audits were happening to, like, I was in Hamilton and Guelph and Ottawa and having to go to Thunder Bay. And I was like, okay, I'm getting out of here. But there was a lot of informal mentorship, but my manager at CRA actually said to me, you need to get out. Like, this place is too slow for you. It's going to kill you. And it was pretty funny because we're still good friends. And I went to the provincial auditor's office for about just under a year before I left. So I think there's a lot of informal mentorship. And when I got to Bermuda, I think you had asked me previously about being a woman in a very male-dominated environment, right? So in Bermuda, the culture was like, you worked hard, you spent a lot of time with your colleagues, the social hours were long. They started on a Thursday night and went on till Sunday morning. And I actually couldn't participate in it the same way. It's just for one, it wasn't my general personality, but for the second part, I had just gotten married and I'd moved away. So I actually had a hard time fitting into that landscape. There weren't many girls. If they were there, they were single. And it was actually a little bit tricky. What did change was, again, some of the informal mentorships. This gentleman was hired from Boston. He was my manager. He walked in, sat with me for 2 weeks, and went and told the director, actually, she should be my manager. Very, very sweet, like, nice person. He actually stayed with me for a couple of months when he needed a place. And so it was like a lot of that informal stuff. And then our operations, head of operations changed, as in the CEO I mentioned moved back to New York, and a different guy joined, and he said, how do we decide who becomes a manager? And they were like, oh, we just, based on our preferences and our performance, like, we pick someone. And he was like, no, I don't like that. We're going to start doing interviews. So for the first time, that company ran an interview process for managers. And he picked 4 women. Until then, there was like no women managers. They were all guys. So he picked 4 women. And I remember when I found out, I walked up to him and I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm pregnant. And he was like, I don't know why you're sorry about it. And I was like, because I have to take time off. And he goes, are you planning to, never come back to work? And I was like, no. And he goes, I think we can manage without you for 3 months. So it was, again, another person who'd made sort of an informal decision to prioritize a change in the landscape. So that was a sort of a second one. And then when I moved to Citco back to Toronto, which was a big deal for them because they'd put so much effort into all of us. But when I moved to Toronto, it was after 6 months. I'd notified them for like 6 months and moved back. Citco was a 50-person company that had just bought a back office of a really large hedge fund to allow them to do front to back services. So we went from that 50 and we were predicting that we were going to be like 250 within a year. And it was all timing and luck. I just happened to show up at that stage. And there weren't really any mentors there. So I quickly became a mentor to new people, to the executives who wanted to do something in Toronto because New York is very expensive. They wanted to grow Toronto more. So that, like, again, there was another opportunity to do something to set yourself apart. And I kind of stepped into that role. And then after that, I think I had several mentors. I had people I did pitches with that liked me and sort of gave me new opportunities every time. I had a couple of management team members, one of them local, who started to see the potential in me and pushed me forward. And it was a very natural process. It wasn't formal. I don't think I ever had a review in however number of years that I worked there. And it was very informal, but it was also, you raised yourself and the people with you, right? So it was a organic process.
Awesome. Now, I can't talk to you without addressing the looming fact. Okay, so we're in finance. We know that it's dominated by males and usually white males. You kind of touched on that as well. But I like how you said, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant, because it's, it might seem silly, but I think there's a lot of people saying, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant. And maybe their bosses are not as nice as your boss was. So it kind of leads me to ask the question, do you think women in these corporate environments, whether it's as rigorous as finance or not, do you think women can have it all? Can you be that mom and that pit bull at the same time?
So I'm going to say something that maybe a little bit politically incorrect. For sure, you can have it all at the same time. It's like getting ready in the morning. If you're a guy, it takes you 10 minutes. If you're a girl and you spend 2 hours, you are behind the 8 ball already at the start of the day. So having a kid will take you out of the running occasionally. You're not there, just back to presence, right? Male or female, it's about being present, and it's about people seeing you and people noticing you, and you being able to help make things happen for them. So I think when you are going to have a kid and you are choosing to take a year off or 18 months, I think it will impact your timeline. Having said that, I just spent some time with Manulife's, like our MIM division's CMO, so our Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer. She's a young mother of 2. She has 2 kids under the age of 4. And this is the role she's in. So the world has absolutely changed from 21 years ago when I had my older daughter. And women are finding ways to make it happen. And the corporations are much more mindful of having real diversity, having people at the table that offer genuine diversity, right? So yeah, she has 2 kids under the age of 4. She's like, COVID happened, and we were like, let's have them, let's get it done. So she had 2 kids back to back, and she got to spend time with them. And she's back in a huge job. and travels an extraordinary amount, but she's making it work. So I think you're not going to be there for every play or every musical or every parent teacher interview. I think my kids remember me being late or not present to many events. My in-laws or my parents would be at most. And then as they got older, I was very senior and I had a lot more flexibility and I could show up to everything that I wanted to show up to because I could make my schedule work. So I think you kind of have to, there's compromises. You can't have it all at the same time. But it has afforded me so many things that I wouldn't have been able to do with them.
That's true, because even now in your role, you're still running around with your daughters, taking them everywhere, organizing everything for them. So, you're still you, but at a higher position where you can set your schedules now, but you're also the super mom who's running around and doing all these things for her two daughters that
I don't bake cookies. I rarely make a home cooked meal. There's people, my mom does it for them. So there's things you don't do, but you make it work and you will have your own set of priorities that you will get through. So I think it's important to be present is what I would say in order to get ahead. I think it's less about whether you're a male or a female now. And the amount of time and commitment is often a challenge when you want to be a mom. I don't think the world has, decided that if you, I don't think there's a practice around she's a woman, she's a mom, we need to sort of cut her some slack. At these corporate roles, there is no, you're there because you're good. And you're there because you are going to be present for that extended negotiation or that, major milestone that you're trying to get done.
Right. Well, that's comforting to hear. And I think it's just reality for anyone who is maybe in the mid-career section, even early or late, and thinking of doing this diverged path of building their family. I think it's a very real concern for a lot of women. I can't lie, I've thought about it so many times as well. And it's just reality, and it's refreshing to hear that you could still.
And it's my experience. Let's be clear. This is my experience. There's lots of people might not agree with me and may be forging a totally different path, and they have the circumstances to do so. But it hasn't been my experience that you are able to do it with a 9-to-5 sort of experience.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Can I ask you what you like to do for fun on your personal time?
So that's actually a good question. I mean, traditionally speaking, I love to travel, I love to spend time with my kids, et cetera, which I do plenty of. But I think what I've realized as I sort of get to this juncture in my career where it's like, what am I going to do next? And I think this is where I've really gotten engaged in various non-for-profits. I've joined a couple of boards. And if I have to think about why that is valuable, is because you do slow down as you get older, and it isn't as easy to put in an 80-hour work week and drive something forward. So I have started to think about what's next. And I think leveraging my experiences in the corporate world, in sort of charitable events, and I've always been involved in the kids' schools. And I have a real passion about the education system and the quality of it and why it's important to continue to demand the best out of it. So I get involved in different things that are intriguing to me, including debating heavily on various topics with various people, present company included. So that's something where I have a lot of fun. And I think one of the things that's cool about it is everyone cannot be the head of strategy or the head of sales or the next person that makes a decision on what's the cutting edge thing you're going to do. In a big company, you are sometimes just an execution person, even at these roles. You're executing on a priority or a strategy that's been set well above you, whether you like it or not. But the nice thing about being involved in charitable organizations or non-for-profits or some of the boards that I sit on is you actually get to be part of their strategy. You get to help them shape the vision that they want for their organization. And it's a lot of fun. And you know, it gives you a chance to play with an idea and try and shape and form how they get to, and then watch them play out that strategy over 3 to 5 years. So yeah, I get a lot of fun, joy out of it. And I think it's a nice space because there's a lot of demand to have diverse perspectives, be it women of color, men of color, you know, and even of ability. So I'm quite excited for the timing around it for me. And I'm starting to think more and more about how do I be as qualified as I can be for the next board I want to apply to. Right now, I don't have the time to do more than what I'm doing. So I'm sort of thinking about, you know, what are the, there is a director course that you can take. It's quite involved. You have to sort of apply for it. And I think that's going to be the next thing I get done.
Amazing. Look at you. You're still learning. You're still
Absolutely.
thriving for new things. Super inspiring. People who decide to stop at like mid-30s do better, right? That's super, super inspiring and motivating for people like me, especially. I like to do different things at different times, maybe too many things at too many times, but as you like to tell me,
It's the best way to be.
Yeah. I like that. So, you know, it's never ending. Well, speaking of ending, we eventually do need to end our very insightful chat, but I would be remiss not to ask you something about the Tamil community. And, you know, your personal life is a little different. Actually not that different. You had, you know, you got married, you had your 2 children, you did Bharatanatyam, you know, we speak the occasional Tamil.
I know every Scarborough school that I danced in. Yes.
There you go. And then midway through, you were at a crossroads in your marriage, and now you've separated, you're divorced now. And you know, life is going on and you're doing all these things, you're going to be on the board. And, you know, even the word divorce in the Tamil community, I think, until recently wasn't really ever mentioned. And it's a little taboo, and especially for women for some reason, even though, you know, traditionally it's a heterosexual relationship. How did you navigate that? Did you find any sort of negative reactions from the community, or, you know, did that not have an impact? Did you think about that when, you know, you had to come to that decision ultimately?
So I think this is where like our family dynamics really helped. Obviously my parents were devastated. For them, it was so not what they had signed up for and would have struggled with. And I think a lot of it had to do with their concern for their grandkids and for their extended family, as in my in-laws and themselves. So I think they represented all the traditional fears and concerns. And I think I would say that innately, as a person, good or bad, I'm an independent thinker. I make terrible decisions at times, and I make great decisions at other times, but at the end of the day, it's mine that I have to live with. And the one thing I would say to my parents is, I managed to get these kids this far. I think I can do the rest. It'll be okay. I have a very unique relationship with my in-laws as well. And they're unique people in many ways. We've figured out how to remain more than friends, stay friends and family, in fact. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that beyond that, I didn't really have to worry about what anyone else thought, right? The real impact is to my kids and to my family. And for everyone else, it's not really relevant. And most of our friends and family don't behave like it's relevant. We still get invited to things together, and we depending on who it's for, we show up as a family. I mean, so we don't really, I guess we haven't distorted it massively yet. It doesn't mean we don't agree or disagree on things. It just means we know how to put what's important first.
Mhm.
And that's basically our kids.
Amazing. It's inspiring to see that, even on a personal level, because, you and your ex-husband have a great relationship. You and your kids have a great relationship. All of you have a great relationship.
As in, we don't, what, let's be clear. The key is that we know how not to be jerks to each other.
Exactly.
All the time. That's really what it is. It doesn't mean we don't disagree and don't want to be at times. It's about, it's not relevant at some point, right? So that, I think, is it. And this is where I'd say the uniqueness of my in-laws and my parents. They just could see way past it. They could see it wasn't about them. It was just two people. And therefore, everybody else kept it together and wanted to keep it together. So we do have a very odd and unique situation, which I highly recommend if you want to have peace and harmony for yourself and your children.
And I think that was kind of the purpose of me asking that, because I know you personally and I know how healthy the relationships are. And I was just wondering to see, or, if the rest of the community could also possibly be this way in the future, because now we're hearing people are getting divorced way more than we used to, maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still something a little bit of a taboo subject, and it shouldn't be. And because precisely there are people like yourself and many others that I know that life is happening, kids are healthy, happy. Now we're going to go and sit on new boards and enjoy our life.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to point out, which was that life moves on. Yeah.
And it's an evolution. We're maturing as a community. We should take the best of ours and marry it with the best of what's around us. And I think, family has been a big part of a lot of my success, from moving here to, even my experiences dancing. I had my cousins who took me everywhere, and, homemade dancing kits and all of that stuff. It was all sort of family that supported you through that stuff. So I think it always resonates. And then you just adapt to things that don't work for you. But there's no point in knocking your head against the wall at some stage, because it's taboo not to be separated.
Right. And that is a great note to end our discussion on. And thank you so much for being so open and joining us today, Kumi. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. It was my pleasure.